the amount of times where leaders of significant Jewish organizations said that I will always have this "I told you so" credit. I'm like, that's not a credit I want.
No, it's not that I wanted to be right. I knew I was right, however. I'm devastated to be right. It's disheartening even now that there are still facets of what I say where I'm speaking to the truth and factual information, where there is still an element of libel around the extremities of my advocacy.
There was a time when telling the truth was the goal. Today, it can feel like the risk. Across media, entertainment, activism, even within our own communities, people are learning that clarity comes with consequences. Say something that challenges the narrative, and suddenly it's not just disagreement, you're sidelined, dismissed, pushed out, rewritten, blacklisted. I've experienced this across every part of my work. As a journalist reporting on global affairs, as a commentator analyzing media and political narratives, even as an actor and filmmaker navigating the entertainment industry. Definitely as a LGBT advocate and a voice within Jewish American and Israeli spaces. Within this strategic advisory work at the intersection of policy, communications, and culture. See, but what I've seen again and again and again is this. Truth is welcome until it disrupts the story people want to tell. So that's why we have this show, Common Ground. Not as a place for easy agreement, but as a space for honest conversation. A space where we don't avoid complexity, we confront it. Where we don't trade in slogans, we seek clarity. My guest today understands exactly what that costs. Eve Barlow is a writer, cultural critic, and independent thinker who has navigated legacy media, built her own platform, and refused to dilute her voice, even when it came at a professional and personal price. So today, we're asking, what does it mean to speak honestly in a world that rewards conformity? Who decides what can be said and what can't? And what are we willing to risk to stay true to what we know is real? I'm Yuval David, and this is Common Ground, where courage meets conversation, and values light the way. So, Eve Barlow isn't only this amazing individual who, I don't know if does bold things, but communicates clearly in a way that I wish more people would communicate. Eve Barlow isn't only that type of person, she's also my friend. Eve, I was just speaking about you to that camera, even though you're sitting right here, right in front of me. We first met in Israel.
We met in the upper lounge of the Sheraton Grand Hotel, Tel Aviv. Shout out.
Yeah, shout out.
Our family home from home.
That is a shout out to the Sheraton in Tel Aviv and the Marriott corporate brand. But really, it was this hotel and their team who, wow, memories are just flooding my mind, who at the start of the war, when we were coming to Israel at a time when people were trying to leave Israel if they weren't citizens, and Israeli citizens were going to Israel. The staff there created some sort of home away from home.
It was actually, when I think about that time, it makes me very emotional for so many different reasons. I remember it was the evening. I think it must have been about 7 o'clock at night. I had just arrived. I just had my first day. I arrived, it was Christmas Day of 2023. And I had arrived at 5:30 in the morning, direct from LAX, and was on a bus by 7 a.m. to go to Kibbutz Be'eri. And I spent the whole day in the south, in the Otef, at Be'eri and at Re'im. I met a Nova survivor called Nehorai. And we were there at the Re'im forest where the Nova Festival was until the sunset. And Nehorai talked us through his survival story. It was deeply emotional. And we came back to the hotel and I just needed to breathe for a second. And you walked in to the lounge. And I remember there was such a familiarity between us, even though we had never met before. I almost was gaslighting myself that I hadn't already met you. And it says a lot that I had zero energy at this point because I had just been in the Holocaust all day. And also, it was a tremendously emotional experience from the viewpoint of having been in the diaspora since October 7th. And this was my experience coming to Israel and having this exhale after 6 or 7 weeks of the really discombobulating experience of being in the West post October 7th. And then I meet you, and for some reason, the level of fatigue does not dissuade me from wanting to gobble you up immediately. And I found a second wind, and I remember we had a conversation that night, and you were in the phase of this phase of the extend phase, as I remember it being.
The extend phase.
The word extend that kept coming up over and over, which expresses some of the insanity of the moment.
Yeah, which those of you who don't know is to extend my time in Israel, which so many of us ended up doing because we didn't want to leave.
We didn't want to leave. They didn't want us to leave. So it was just this constant, you saw the look on the face before the word extend would come out. Totally. Is the only, really, like for some Israelis, the only English word that they were understanding and using. But you were contemplating an extension, and I was about to hear the word extend way until about a month later when I was still there.
Yeah, we're still there and still extending our time in Israel. Yeah, 2023, the end of 2023 was harrowing and life-changing. And I also vividly remember the moment that I guess we first met in actuality, but maybe I feel like we communicated before, or we knew of each other before, or
I don't know if we were following each other, but I definitely, there was an awareness.
I was going to say at the end of a very taxing day, but it wasn't. The taxing and the stress didn't end, but that familiarity was something that somehow provided comfort in the understanding of shared trauma. Mm-hmm. And understanding that at the same time, it would almost be hard to refer to our own traumas because we weren't in Israel on October 7th.
No.
We weren't attacked physically. We weren't killed or raped or taken hostage like people we know. To understand what October 7th meant was this here we go again sort of feeling. Mm-hmm. Where everything that we learned as Jews, who we are, what our history is, what our parents and what our grandparents went through, it was like a light switch that just clicked and said, oh, everything that we learned was to prepare us for this moment that we really thought would never happen.
Yeah, I think that was what was a shared unique experience for us, is that we are not October 8th Jews.
No.
We were in this advocacy space for years prior. We had experienced a lot of our own trauma prior to October 7th. And October 7th was almost this cataclysm of horror, but validation for a scream that we had been screaming for many, many years, which is, this is leading somewhere tremendously awful. And October 7th did not surprise me. It was relentlessly grueling and harrowing and terrible, but it was written. It was the natural place for all of this to meet. It was
clearly going to happen. And mm-hmm. I also oftentimes would describe, and once in a while still describe it the same way today, of not being surprised. I was shocked, mm-hmm. but not surprised, because I've been in the Jewish advocacy and activism space for most of my life, and then professionally as part of my life and career for 20 years. And within other elements of advocacy in society, I started to see the cancer of anti-Jewish hatred, whether disguised or specifically mentioned as being against Jews or anti-Semitic, or being disguised as anti-Zionist or anti-Israel or whatever other terminology people wanted to apply to it. It was a cancer that was spreading. And so many of our Jewish leaders and organizations and political leaders in the United States, in Israel, and internationally dropped the ball. And the amount of times where leaders of significant Jewish organizations said that I will always have this "I told you so" credit. I'm like, that's not a credit I want.
No.
Especially, like, for example, within the LGBTQ space.
Yeah. I've always said, I have always maintained, and I find myself saying this quite often, it's not that I wanted to be right. I knew I was right, however, and I'm devastated to be right. And it's disheartening even now that there are still facets of what I say where I'm speaking to the truth and factual information, where there is still an element of libel around the extremities of my advocacy. There is nothing extreme about anything that I have said. And it is fascinating to go back sometimes and look at some of the more extreme angles of my voice, allegedly, even a few years ago, and how commonplace it is for so many more people to say exactly what both of us were saying, foreshadowing events.
Which was
very
speaking
recently.
truth and
Yes.
seeing what is actually happening, and allowing to not only have a critical eye, but being vocal about it and speaking out about it, not from a place of trying to bring anybody down per se, but to bring people up, to repair, to fix. And in contrast, as I say that, there are certain people who I did and still do want to bring down. So let me be clear, because there were movements, political movements, community organizations within entertainment, within media, within the LGBT space, within progressive worlds, within political spaces that I wanted to improve. But there were absolute bad actors who were manipulating all of those spaces, and those are the ones who I still want to bring down.
I mean, we're human. We are human, and there are people on my list, and I will be grabbing my bag of popcorn when Karma, when she comes knocking on that door. I will be, I don't engage in schadenfreude. I've watched people engage in schadenfreude as regards me, and I hope someday they understand what that feels like. It's not energetically.
They will.
Energetically, it's not going to come from me, because I am affected by what's happened to me, and I know how cruel it is when you're in that moment. But I absolutely understand, and I'll say this, it's going to be worse for them because they were wrong. And
see, but my thing is, I don't know when that worse for them is going to be. I say, yes, someday when the world, when whoever will understand that they are wrong and that they were wrong, what are the ramifications that they're going to face? Or are they going to be like the Nazis who just blended into society, or the communists in Venezuela who are at the top who just quietly blended into society? Or what's going to happen with the IRGC when hopefully, if hopefully the IRGC in Iran gets totally demolished? Are these people who are in the wrong in the way that they were attacking Jews, attacking Zionists, attacking Israel, attacking democracy as we know it, are they just going to blend in and not have any issue? I don't know.
Well, I think what I'm talking about is that they will have to deal with the consequences of what they have asked for. And, if we take Iran as a perfect example, okay? And I am advocating all the time for the 90 million minus however many IRGC members there are, people of Iran, to experience freedom in our lifetime. And what will that freedom look like, and what will happen as a result of that freedom? I cannot wait personally to learn from the free, liberated people of Iran what their experience has been for the last 47 years, to bear witness to what they have been, how they have been subjugated, how it happened, how they can retell the story, how they can speak to the regret, because I am absolutely sure that they have experienced a lifetime of regret, the older generations, for what they assisted and enabled, and the lessons we can learn from that. And I know still that there are so many people around us who we could name that will shut their ears to those people because they're already lost in their own, myopic view about who should be heard and who shouldn't. However, the lesson will show us what the future holds for the people who have tried to suppress our voices, which is, as I say, there will be so much regret among the older generations of Iranians, who, especially those who were in the universities.
Yeah, and who were student activists who actually supported the early Islamic Revolution. And they went hand in hand because they said, oh, the Islamic Revolution wants to change things. And we, the students, want to change things. And they partnered with who eventually became their enemy.
Absolutely.
The only people who benefited from within that student movement and the Marxist and the socialist and the communist movements that went hand in hand with the Islamist revolutionaries, the only people from those groups that profited were the ones who joined, were the leaders of those movements who sold out all of their followers because they had potential power to gain, financial gain, and that proves to you how dirty they actually were, these leaders. And the ones who didn't ultimately want to proceed in marching and joining with the Islamist revolution were killed or vanished.
Yeah. Exactly.
So that's something that the Iranian community definitely is already speaking about and recognizing. And what is shocking is when I see them trying to explain things to Western liberals, to say, well, look, understand, we went through this, listen to our lived experience. And when they're rejected or when they themselves are called Islamophobic or called racist or called anti-Arab, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, listen to what we went through. And I mean, I know Muslim Iranians who are with every fiber of their being against the Islamic Republic. And we see these liberals in the West who don't want to hear it from them.
Yeah.
So what happened to just listening? What happened to wokeism and progressivism and understanding that different people have a different narrative and you should just sometimes listen to it? They don't want to hear it. Why? Because so many of these people who call themselves activists and who claim to really care have built all of their opinions on ideology, not on values.
No, there's no value.
That's scary.
There's no value system. I was talking about this just yesterday. And the reason why they have already, the cognitive dissonance has already been implanted like a chip in their brain. And it's easier for me to think of it like that because the infection, the mind virus, it takes over gradually. Okay, so we've seen it move through several social justice movements over time. It didn't start with Palestinianism. It started with Me Too and climate justice and LGBTQIA expansionism and the BLM movement. And now we're arriving at popularized Islamism, basically.
Beyond.
And it should be shocking, but the reason it's not is because it has been this gradual regression towards the most theocratic ideology imaginable. And
it's clear that it is the most violent theocratic ideology currently on Earth. But the thing is, they've been gradually progressing this since the 1960s when they started to get into the university systems the same way they did in Iran, the same way they did in other Arab countries, the same way they did in Lebanon, the same way they did in Syria. These are things that that happened and they succeeded in. And that's how the Islamism progressed, because those who believe in the need for Islamism and jihadism and the spreading of Sharia law in a global caliphate recognized that jihadism wouldn't be acceptable for every society, where violence would be shunned. So they chose Islamism, referring to it as a political movement, connecting Islamophobia to the concepts of homophobia, which the two totally different things, or making sure that you can't speak about any other bigotry that a specific marginalized minority faces without also mentioning Islamophobia. And that's how they were able to conflate all of the issues, where the ideology of all these people who say, oh, we care about Palestinians, or we care about Muslims around the world and their rights because they're a marginalized minority. I'm like, no, honey, there are 2.2 billion people on this planet. There are 2.4 billion Christians. There are 2.2 billion Muslims. There are 1.4 billion Hindus. There are 585 million Buddhists. Going through the whole list, there are 15.5 million Jews. So if you're going to talk about a marginalized minority, maybe talk about the Zoroastrians, maybe talk about Jews, maybe talk about the Druze, maybe the Baha'i. There's so many other groups who are an actual minority. The manipulated masses are scary, and it's hard for me, or scare me, and it's hard for me to see what they're doing as willful ignorance.
Yeah, I don't think it's willful ignorance at all. This is one of the biggest things I find myself reacting to. I don't spend a lot of time in my comment section, but when somebody says,
"Oh boy," you said you do or you don't?
I don't.
Oh, good.
When somebody says, but they're just ignorant or they don't know what they're doing, I have to correct them. They absolutely know what they are doing. They do it with full recognition. You said something about value systems. The only value that they have, and they say it all the time in various ways, is that the end justifies the means, right? So that's the only value that they have. And if that is their value,
but what is the end?
Then there's zero value system, because lying then becomes part of a justified end, right? In order to lie, I don't believe, and maybe this is because maybe it's just my wiring, I actually cannot imagine a situation in where you can fabricate a narrative or manipulate a story without being conscious of what you are doing. I don't think that there is accidental lying. You cannot create a bullet point of a fact sheet about something that you're talking about without understanding where you got those facts from, how you edited them in a way to present your argument. It's sort of like, so much of what we're seeing in abuse of power right now is going on in a legal realm, and we're seeing a lot of lawfare on this issue with the constant usage of this idea of international law to police common sense moves by America and Israel as regards Iran. International law is constantly being summoned when we're policing how Israel defends its borders, for instance. But, when you look at how lawyers don't operate from a standpoint of telling the total truth about everything. They operate from a standpoint of taking what works for a narrative in their client's best interests, right? And then arguing back and forth on these points.
Which
and
leads
who is
to,
able to present the most convincing argument. But this isn't about total and absolute truth.
No.
And that's where everyone has become carried away with the idea that they are arbiters of the truth. You're not an arbiter of the truth. This progressive ideology is about massaging reality to fit some kind of utopia that I'm afraid.
I refer to it as the not just massaging, but forcing facts to fit their beliefs as opposed to shaping their beliefs based on facts. Mm-hmm. That's a very dangerous thing.
Yeah.
Massaging the truth, however you wish to call it, repainting it, repackaging it, rebranding it, or lying about it. Mm-hmm. That is what is so frightening, where people talk about well, that's your narrative, but I have a different narrative. Or the amount of arguments that I've had either live on air, on broadcast news, or in panel discussions in front of audiences to try to teach, and people come to watch this Romanesque political conversation, or people I actually know in real life who'll say, well, what I'm hearing is, and then they'll continue and they'll say something totally different than what I actually say. And I have to say, well, when did I say that?
Right.
Where did I share that?
Yeah.
They're like, well, this is what I feel. I was like, okay, what I say and do doesn't impact what you feel. You impact what you feel. There are so many stimuli all around the world that will affect you. But when we look at the legal proceedings that are happening, we also need to focus on who are the clients, who is paying for this. So when we look at the International Court of Justice, and when UN organizations also are condemning Israel, and human rights groups within the UN look at Israel as the number one worst oppressor of human rights, and meanwhile Iran is leading those groups, or Muslim countries where women don't have rights, LGBTQ people don't only get thrown off of buildings, they get killed daily or forced into sex slavery. There are so many issues that people are ignoring and saying, oh, but let's condemn Israel. So the question again of willful ignorance comes up. Are they just looking at these people and saying, oh, that person works at the UN, then they must be correct, or that person is a lawyer or a judge, then they must completely be correct, or understanding that's why I go back to values. What are the values that that person maintains, and should I connect to them? So when I see the progressive movements that I used to be part of, who are aligning with people who are completely against their way of life and still don't recognize that they're just being used and manipulated, that's when I say, how ignorant can they be? And are they really choosing a hatred of the system, or a hatred of Jews, or a hatred of Israel as a justification to align with the movements that are against their way of life?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, none of this is about values. It's all about power, and feeling power and taking power away from a place of vengefulness as opposed to justice. These are people who are searching into an empty void, actually, for a way to fix their distress about the world, their feeling that they've been kind of hard done by. There's a lot of talk about how I'm a victim and how I'm traumatized. And there's just I would say a state of dissatisfaction about the world that they all share in common. And they're looking into this emptiness of each other where there is no value, but they've imagined that they have shared values without actually ever having talked about what those values are. They're looking into this emptiness in each other to say, okay, well, if we stick together and we identify who the enemies are and who we're against, and we take power from them and give it to ourselves, then that's going to fix everything. There's no salve in that, because they're not looking into themselves and going on a deep inward spiritual journey to stop feeling that sense of dissatisfaction. It's all fueled by hate and negativity.
See, but it's the hate and the negativity, I think, is a coping mechanism. Instead of saying to themselves and recognizing what they're dissatisfied within themselves or within their own lives, it's easier to blame somebody else for it. It's easier to scapegoat somebody else.
It's way easier. And the Jews are always the easiest scapegoat.
Yeah, and Jews were blamed for being capitalist. Jews were blamed for being communist. Jews were blamed for being rich, and they were blamed for being poor. They were blamed for being part of society and blending in society, and they were blamed for not being part of society. Why this is once again repeating itself, or if you want to just say that history doesn't repeat, it rhymes, whichever way you want to approach it, it definitely proves that I was educated enough as to what it means to be a Jew, that I was prepared for this moment, because I was taught not just about Jewish history and culture, but also taught why I'm a proud citizen of America and also a proud citizen of Israel, two democracies that are not perfect, that are far from perfect, but have systems that are trying to improve. And that's what led me to being involved in so many political movements and community movements where I thought that it was also about bettering our community. So that leads me to speak about the LGBTQIA2S plus movement, which years ago I criticized as no longer being a community, and it became a political movement. Sure. The community that was all about tolerance and inclusion became intolerant and became exclusive. And we saw this movement becoming manipulated, but then there was a time that I embraced, actually, when people started referring to me as queer. I was like, oh, I get it. Maybe Q is, I thought it used to be questioning, like for people who didn't know that they were gay or lesbian yet or bi and were questioning. But then queer became a political movement. And then I was told by a dear friend of mine, this friend of mine, Michael, he said to me, he's like, Yuval, you're not queer, darling. You're gay. You're gay, like old school gay, new school gay. You're gay, just gay. And I was like, you know what? You're right. I'm just gay. Yeah. So I know that both of us have lost many of our friends within this movement and people who identify as any one of the letters. Has that still continued for you in terms of still losing friends?
It never stops. Yeah. That never stops. I was having a conversation with someone the other day. I've been writing a lot more about this specifically because there's a real need for us to now address this. I mean, there's always been a need, and we must also acknowledge, I think it's really important to acknowledge that most of the people who were loud about this the earliest, all of us are gay, lesbian, bisexual Jews, all of us, because we identified this issue first and foremost because it was infecting a so-called safe space, a community at large. Yeah. And when there's something so unique about our experience in the sense that we gravitate towards a community in the same way as we do gravitate because we're Jewish to a Jewish community, because it's such a fundamental facet of our intimate world.
And that's what's unfortunate, that it's no longer the LGB space or the LGBTQIA2S plus, whatever you want to call it. That space is no longer a safe space. And when I'm in those spaces... It hasn't been for a long time.
It hasn't been for a long time. And the reason is because, I mean,
when did you first notice that it wasn't a safe space anymore? When you say long time. I know exactly when I started to notice it.
I noticed it. It was always there, actually. I don't think it was ever not there. It was always, if you look at the seeds of when this began, with the, I'm only in my late 30s. So for me, the queering of this space has kind of always existed in my lifetime because it goes back to the 1980s. Right. However, from an academic standpoint, from a commercial standpoint, when it became much more actually commercially viable to be gay than it was to be straight in this town, which was such a 180.
Being Hollywood.
Yeah. It was such a 180 from even 15 years ago. That's when the word queer started to become so everyday that it was no longer able to be ignored, the politicization of the identity. But for me, there was always this discomfort around Israel. There was always this sort of infection of a queer Marxist ideology. I always picked up on it. I did.
I didn't always pick up on it. I used to know so many people, especially in the gay world, who loved going to Tel Aviv Pride, right. The gays and lesbians and bi people and trans people who used to love going to Tel Aviv Pride, saying it was the most festive, it was the most fun, that Israelis are gorgeous, and would talk about all these things, until that started to become unpopular because the way the LGBTQ movement was manipulated by the Islamist movement and was forced under the progressive umbrella, where it used to be more acceptable for there to be conservative LGBT people and Republican LGBT people and religious LGBT people. And I kept being around, because of interfaith work and intercultural work, around people who were Catholic or Christian or Jewish, who still wanted to practice their faith and also just be openly gay or lesbian, and were struggling, and so many times would be shunned by the LGBT community more than by the religious communities. I remember years ago, I was speaking at a conference where there were 8,000 or almost 8,000 LGBT advocates and activists and politicians and organizations. And during my speech, I mentioned that, oh yeah, last night I was at Shabbat services. I was at synagogue last night, and there was a groan from the audience. Like someone went, ooh. And I heard it, and I said, wait a second, was that a groan of like, you were there too, and it was too long of a service? Or was that a groan that you looked down upon it? And this woman yelled out like, religion sucks.
Right.
I was like, wow. See, if I would have said, instead of going to synagogue last night, I went out to a bunch of gay bars and, went onto all of the apps, that would have been applauded. And people are like, yeah, and actually applauded in real time. And I was like, see, this is part of the problem.
Yeah.
We are no longer a movement of tolerance and inclusion. We're excluding. And instead of saying that, look at our diverse LGBTQIA2S+ community, we all need to conform and become the same. And that is scary. That's not fabulous to me. And then the changing of the pride flag to try to represent more people and then raise the pride flag above other flags, well, that's no longer fair to the other people and the other identities.
I mean, that's kind of what I was saying earlier about power. This is a power grab. This is about vengeance.
Right.
It's about hate. It's about getting back at some perception of how we've been downtrodden and, how we've somehow been traumatized and victimized and harmed by society, which is the opposite of pride. There is no pride in the community anymore. And to use that word, it's such a bastardized now definition of that word, is who is the most oppressed? And we're fighting against the oppressor.
And it just can't be about
pride.
Yeah.
There's no pride in oppression.
No.
There's pride in being empowered. There's pride in aspiring to be all the things in the world that you can be, despite how some people may prejudice you. It has, there is no sense of feeling enlightened by this movement anymore. The majority of what is done in an advocacy space even is propelled by a need to seek revenge and by a need to sow the seeds of hate, to bring something else down. It's not about shining a light on voices. It's about opposing a government, opposing a power base, opposing this, that, and the other.
Which is about tearing things down as opposed to building things up.
There's no building.
I learned actually that my LGBT advocacy and activism work from my early years improved all of my activism and advocacy because it empowered the element of improving, of repairing, of making things better, of truly focusing on inclusion. But then while in those movements, I started to see more of the people in the victimhood competition. Who is the biggest victim within the LGBT community? Who is more oppressed? And let's align ourselves with anybody who's oppressed, because queer rights are just like rights of other people who are oppressed.
That's the irony.
Are different things.
That's the irony about the continued adding on of all the letters.
Right.
What are we adding? We're not adding. What we're doing is we're subsuming more and more victims, more and more oppressed, to make the hatred grow, to make the antagonism grow.
Yeah, because in democracies, gay people, lesbian people, bi people, and even in certain spaces, trans people, especially the LGB parts, are in part of almost every part of society that we see in democracies. We've achieved our rights.
Right.
So what do I also think happens? These LGBTQ organizations said, what do we do with all the money we raised? What do we do about our jobs?
But there are things that they can do.
To focus on
there are
things?
things that that's the thing that's so frustrating, is that why are we subsuming letters where we haven't first of all checked whether or not they're okay with our rights? You know, why should we take on the P of Palestinianism without actually saying, wait, are you okay with us being gay? Like, that should be the first step to
Absolutely.
going into a partnership, a contract with anyone, is, do we have shared values? Do we want to protect one another? So that is not something that's happening. Whereas if it was, what we could be doing as advocates for LGBT rights is trying to create those rights in places around the world where they don't exist. There is so much advocacy that can be done for Palestinians in the opposite way.
Absolutely.
It's just that we're instead of advocating for the rights of gay and lesbian people, for example, in Gaza, what we're doing is supporting their oppressors.
Absolutely.
It's
Supporting
totally
the people
backwards.
who rape them, who kill homosexuals in Gaza are killed by Gazans, are killed by Hamas. They're killed by the Islamist terror groups or the Islamist caliphate and enactors of Sharia law within their own communities.
Yeah.
So how they're choosing to target and condemn Israel, the only country in the Middle East that actually supports LGBTQ rights, is beyond me. But again, it's because you and I focus on values and are able to not only stick to our opinions all the time, but to see what is actually happening and being able to openly criticize or openly support whoever's doing something right based on those values. I wish more people would be open enough to do that. I wish more people in the LGBT space would be open enough to do that. I've lost the vast majority of my friends in the United States, where I've lived my whole life.
Yeah.
Most of my LGBT friends are no longer friends because they chose to take a position against Israel. Meanwhile, most of them have never been to Israel, are not Jewish, are not Muslim, don't have any skin in the game. And kind of like here in LA, where we're having this conversation today, many of them are those limousine liberals who have a great life, don't know any hardship, and are just choosing a popular hashtag to say they really care about the plight of somebody. But like you just said, all they're doing with their activism is going against someone else, but not doing anything to support and uplift the people they claim to support.
Well, they're also just not seeing the reality of who they're in a room with. They're not actually seeking truth or honest discussion. They don't want a discussion.
Right.
Everything to do with discussion is suppressed. And the thing that's been the most heartbreaking for me is not even just the anti-Zionism. Some people in the LGBTQ space, they do take a position directly against Israel. For me, some of the most heartbreaking losses have not been as a result of that. They've actually been as a result of old school anti-Semitic libel, of my character being misrepresented, of betrayals that have happened as a result of the position against Israel actually infecting how I'm even understood as a person.
Right. So
it's not the idea of, are you pro or against Palestine, Israel? It's one step removed from that. Is our friend good for us? And, my adjacency, not even my direct work in this realm, there is a cowardice that is being expressed by people I used to know, where they cannot directly come out and say that they're against my position. It's having had to smear me and the very person I am, which, to be honest, is a betrayal that cuts even deeper than just, I don't like how she uses her voice.
Well, because
to actually
it's
rewrite
easier,
the narrative about who I am as a person, because you're too chicken to say that I'm not a good look for you anymore because of the work that I'm doing out in the world that's frankly far more honest and is going to protect you in the future and secure your rights, because sure as hell the people that you're rooting for are not going to do that. In fact, they may talk in realms of human rights and liberty and freedom, but what they are doing is negotiating away all of our rights by partnering up with people who, as I said,
who clearly are expressing that they want to remove those rights.
Exactly.
So I guess that proves the point that it cannot be willful ignorance. And
no.
if it is being chicken, as you said, or not being bold enough to have the conversation about opinions, about beliefs, about how to understand and unpackage or analyze things, it's much easier for many of these people just tear you down.
Let me ask you, really, like, just from a really vulnerable place, how many times have you actually been afforded a conversation with someone that you loved who let you go? I have not actually been able. The most frustrating thing is that I never had a seat at the table. I was never able to have that conversation. I was never granted the opportunity to defend myself, to stand up for myself, to voice what I even think and why I even think it, to talk about my lived experience. I was never granted the opportunity by people I love. I was smeared, I was cancelled, I was libeled. And is that the LGBT community that we came into?
No.
The family tribe that takes you in because the assumption is that the heteronormative world has done you dirty, that you've lost a sense of family and security in the world. These same people abusing you in the same way can't even hear, because all they hear is gay, lesbian. All they hear now is Israel, Jew,
Well, it's the people who talk so much about a non-binary lifestyle are choosing a binary way of thinking. Mm-hmm. Good, bad, black, white, oppressor, oppressed. Life isn't that simple.
No.
If life really is this queer, magical unicorn life that we can be and explore with fluidity who we are, then shouldn't we apply that to everything? We understand that the good comes with the bad.
No, we have to be from the river to the sea.
Right, and that's it. Because it rhymes. If it rhymes and if it fits on a poster, then it must be true.
Right.
It's the kindergarten placard strategy, which is ridiculous. And that was the point that I wanted to say, is that I don't think that the people who aren't able to have the conversations are experiencing a cowardice. I think it's a place of, they recognize that they don't even have the facts, the education, or the understanding, so they'd rather choose and latch on to an emotion. It's the same thing in an argument. I've been in arguments with people who they're losing the argument, so then they just choose an emotion. They get really mad, they get really sad, they get, flip the tables, whatever it is that they want to do in order to win.
I think it's both. I think there is a great shame. I think there is a great shame factor and a cowardice in deciding that you're going to sell out someone who matters to you for the sake of what's comfortable for the collective.
Right.
I do think that there's shame in that.
Well, here's something to just finish, at least on a positive note. For those people who unfriended us in real life or tried to tear us down because they didn't like who we are or our identities or our belief systems and our values, ultimately they prove that they are not part of our community. Mm-hmm. And I think why that first night that we met in person was so impactful is because we recognize that we are part of that same community, that we each need, want to amplify. And the lesson for so many people is not everybody's going to like you. Not everybody's going to love you. And that's okay. And you know what? We don't have to like or love them either, but to have a community where we are safe, where we are able to question and to grow. That is what is most important.
For sure. Mm-hmm.
Eve, there's so much we could speak about, and we'll be speaking once the cameras aren't rolling about much deeper elements of our own lives. But I definitely hope to share more conversations like this, because I receive messages from so many LGBT people or the relatives of LGBT people who are really pained and are afraid to speak up. Mm-hmm. There are those of us who are speaking up. Don't just listen to us, join us. Don't just thank us, join us.
And tell your stories.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you, my friend. Here's the thing. Truth shouldn't require courage. But right now, many people think that it does. What we explored today in this conversation isn't just about media and culture and politics. It's actually about something deeper. What kind of world we're choosing to build? One where people say what is safe, or one where people say what is true? Because once truth becomes conditional, once it depends on who's speaking or who's listening, we're no longer having conversations. We're performing. And that's exactly why this show, Common Ground, exists. Not to force agreement, but to demand honesty. Not to even simplify the conversation, but to elevate it. I've seen this across my work and the work of people who I engage with across journalism or film or advocacy and political strategy, that the people who actually move society forward aren't the loudest, they're the clearest. They're the ones willing to stand in discomfort, in criticism, and in consequence, and still say what needs to be said. Eve is one of those voices. Whether you agree or disagree, that's the standard that we should be holding ourselves to. I'm Yuval David, and this is Common Ground, where we don't fight back, we fight forward. Subscribe, watch, and listen to Common Ground on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and follow on Instagram.